"You said nothing in this universe could break your armor," Admiral Nathan Brooks said quietly, staring at the tactical display without blinking. "You never stopped to ask whether we intended to hit the armor at all." Nobody answered. Nobody in the command center even looked away from the massive holographic projection hanging above them. Every screen showed the same humiliating image. Human railguns fired. Human missiles accelerated. Long-range orbital batteries released volley after volley. Every impact flashed brilliantly across the polished hulls of the invading fleet before fading into nothing. A second later, bright green letters appeared on every battlefield monitor. No penetration. The message repeated itself so many times it almost became background noise. Across the command deck of the alien flagship Dominion Spear, High Warlord Koresh folded all four of his arms behind his back and laughed loud enough for every open broadcast channel to carry it across the galaxy. "Is this truly the legendary ingenuity of humanity?" he asked with obvious amusement. "Your ancestors crossed oceans, climbed mountains, walked upon worlds beyond your own. Yet today you cannot even scratch our armor." His officers chuckled as sensor reports continued arriving. Human destroyers pulled back. Defensive satellites went silent. Missile silos stopped launching. To Koresh, the pattern was unmistakable. Earth had finally accepted reality. Thousands of civilian ships watched the battle unfold through public feeds. Billions more watched from planets scattered across council space. Commentators began speaking over one another. Military analysts confidently declared that humanity had exhausted every conventional weapon in its arsenal. Several council delegates quietly discussed surrender terms before anyone from Earth had even asked for them. Inside Earth Defense Command beneath Colorado Springs, nobody celebrated. Nobody argued. The room was strangely calm, almost uncomfortable in its silence. Officers exchanged short reports while technicians monitored dozens of orbital trajectories. Commander Olivia Hayes glanced toward Brooks. "Our outer defense line is collapsing exactly as projected." Brooks nodded once. "Civilian evacuation? 98% complete." "Good." Colonel Ryan Mitchell looked up from his console. "Sir, every intelligence service in council space believes we're retreating." Brooks allowed himself the smallest smile. "They're supposed to." The room fell silent again as another transmission from Koresh interrupted every frequency. The alien commander stood before rows of flawless black warships, his confidence bordering on theatrical. "Humans," he announced, "you built your civilization on crude machines and primitive projectiles. You believed heavier weapons could compensate for inferior engineering. Today the galaxy has witnessed the truth. Strength belongs to those who evolved beyond such barbaric thinking." Cheers erupted throughout the alien fleet. Some captains even deactivated portions of their defensive systems to conserve power, convinced no human weapon could threaten them anymore. Brooks watched every second without changing expression. He reached over and enlarged a completely different display, one ignored by everyone following the battle. It showed the outer asteroid belt, nearly 1 billion miles from Earth. Hundreds of ordinary mining operations continued drifting through space exactly as they had for decades. Brooks studied one blinking marker before speaking almost casually. "How much mass is still parked in Belt 9? Several officers looked at one another, confused by the question. Colonel Mitchell checked another screen. "Approximately 43 billion tons of extractable rock remain under automated control." Brooks nodded slowly. "And the orbital tug fleet?" "Standing by, sir. They never received deployment orders." Brooks folded his hands behind his back and looked once more at the alien fleet celebrating its flawless victory. His voice stayed calm, almost conversational. "Then maybe it's time we stop trying to prove our weapons can pierce their armor." He paused for only a heartbeat before adding, "Get Dr. Mason Carter on the secure line. I think it's finally time to let physics join the conversation." 18 hours earlier, Dr. Mason Carter was standing on a steel maintenance platform nearly 200 feet above the assembly floor of Johnson Space Center when his phone started vibrating non-stop inside his jacket. Below him, autonomous construction rigs slowly repositioned sections of a commercial asteroid tug that had never been designed for war. Mason ignored the calls at first. Engineers did not get summoned into military emergencies. They got blamed after them. He tightened one last inspection bolt, climbed down the ladder, and wiped the grease from his hands with an old shop towel before finally answering. Carter. The voice on the other end belonged to Commander Olivia Hayes. Calm. Direct. Doctor, Admiral Brooks needs you in Colorado immediately. Mason frowned. You have hundreds of defense scientists closer than I am. He asked for you by name. Mason looked through the enormous hangar windows toward the Texas sky. How fast do you need me there? Yesterday. 2 hours later, he stepped into the underground command facility beneath Colorado Springs carrying nothing more than a weathered laptop case and a paper cup of black coffee that had already gone cold. Security officers hurried him through checkpoint after checkpoint before the final blast door slid open. Admiral Nathan Brooks was already waiting beside the main tactical display. Dr. Carter. Admiral. Brooks motioned toward the glowing image of the approaching alien fleet. Tell me something I have not already heard from 50 defense contractors. Mason studied the display without speaking. Red icons continued multiplying across the outer defense perimeter, while prediction models estimated rapidly declining survival odds. Several officers waited for him to recommend a stronger missile, a larger railgun, or some classified prototype hidden inside a military laboratory. Instead, Mason quietly asked, "Have we confirmed their armor specifications?" Colonel Ryan Mitchell answered, "Everything they claimed appears accurate. Every penetration model has failed." Mason nodded once. "Good." Mitchell blinked. "Good." Mason set his coffee on the conference table. "Because now we can stop wasting time pretending the problem is our ammunition." The room became noticeably quieter. Brooks folded his arms, but said nothing. Mason walked toward the holographic display and enlarged one of the alien battleships until its layered armor structure filled the room. Everybody keeps asking how to punch through this. He tapped the glowing shell surrounding the vessel. Wrong question. Another tap displayed orbital mechanics around the solar system. You do not beat engineering by arguing with it. You change the conditions. One of the civilian consultants frowned. "Doctor, with respect, gravity is not a weapon." Mason smiled faintly. "Gravity has never cared what people call it." Brooks watched him carefully. "Keep going." Mason zoomed farther out until the asteroid belt appeared as thousands of tiny lights circling beyond Mars. These rocks have been drifting for billions of years. We have spent the last 70 years building equipment capable of moving them safely for mining operations. Nobody classified those ships because nobody imagined anyone would use them differently. Commander Hayes slowly looked up from her tablet. "You are talking about redirecting an asteroid, not crashing one into a planet." Mason corrected. "Just changing one orbit enough that someone else happens to be occupying the destination." Silence settled across the room again. It was not disbelief anymore. It was calculation. Brooks finally picked up Mason's cold coffee, took a sip without asking, and nodded once. "That," he said quietly, "is the first useful idea I have heard all morning. Now tell me exactly how much time physics needs before our guests discover they have been studying the wrong battlefield all along." The proposal spread across Earth Defense Command faster than any official order ever could. Some officers called it reckless before they even finished reading the first page. Others simply stared at the orbital diagrams in complete silence. Every simulation reached the same conclusion. If the calculations were correct, humanity would never need to defeat the alien armor because the armor had never been the real target. Admiral Nathan Brooks let the room debate for exactly 6 minutes before raising one hand. Instantly, the voices disappeared. "I have heard every objection," he said evenly. "Now I want facts." Colonel Ryan Mitchell stood first. "The asteroid towing network was built for mining contracts, not military precision. We have never redirected an object this large under combat conditions." Brooks nodded. "Dr. Carter?" Mason stepped beside the projection without looking at the officers around him. "That is true. We have never done it during a war." He tapped another control, replacing the military display with decades of engineering records. "We have, however, moved objects of similar mass hundreds of times for commercial operations. We just called them infrastructure projects." Commander Olivia Hayes leaned closer. "How long before the alien fleet notices orbital changes?" Mason answered without hesitation. "Not soon enough if we make everything look ordinary." Across the room, one intelligence analyst frowned. "You are assuming they will ignore their own sensor network." Mason smiled. "No, I am assuming they will ignore ours." The room fell quiet again. He enlarged a traffic map of the asteroid belt. Hundreds of cargo tugs drifted between mining stations, each following predictable schedules that had remained almost unchanged for years. To them, Mason continued, these are slow industrial vehicles hauling raw material. Nobody watches garbage trucks during a parade. A few people laughed softly. Even Brooks allowed himself the hint of a smile. Meanwhile, nearly 100 million miles away, High Warlord Koresh held another public briefing aboard the Dominion's Spear. Behind him, rows of flawless warships floated in perfect formation while reporters from dozens of worlds transmitted every word. Human resistance has entered its final stage, Koresh declared confidently. Their retreat confirms what our scientists predicted. Primitive civilizations always depend upon excessive firepower because they lack superior engineering. A reporter from a neutral colony raised one question. Do you believe Earth possesses any undisclosed strategic capability? Koresh barely paused before answering. If they did, they would already be using it. The statement echoed across every major news network in Council space. On Earth, people watched from restaurants, airports, military bases, and living rooms. Some looked worried. Others looked defeated. Mason watched the same broadcast from a small conference room while quietly eating a turkey sandwich someone had left beside his laptop. Commander Hayes walked in carrying another stack of orbital reports. You are surprisingly calm. Mason shrugged. When somebody keeps staring at your right hand, you do not wave your left. Hayes laughed before catching herself. You really think they are that confident? Mason looked toward the frozen image of Koresh smiling before the cameras. Confidence is useful. Overconfidence is measurable. Brooks entered moments later. Doctor, the tug captains are waiting for authorization. Mason closed his laptop and stood. Tell them to follow their normal schedules. Mitchell looked confused. That is all. Mason nodded. If anyone changes their routine, someone will notice. Brooks looked around the room one last time before giving the order. No military escorts. No classified communications. No emergency broadcasts. From this moment forward, every mining operation continues exactly as it always has. Thousands of miles above Earth, ordinary cargo crews received simple work orders that looked no different from any other Tuesday. None of them realized history had quietly shifted beneath their feet, and somewhere beyond Mars, a single forgotten asteroid had just become the most important object in the solar system. The first tug left Belt 9 at exactly 6:15 in the morning, Houston time. Nobody held a ceremony. Nobody announced a classified operation. Captain Julia Bennett accepted her flight packet, finished half a cup of coffee, and complained that Mission Control still scheduled maintenance windows too early. Her crew laughed because they had heard the same complaint for almost 5 years. To them, this was another routine shift moving industrial rock from one orbit to another. The only unusual detail was the destination, and even that came wrapped inside ordinary paperwork signed by 3 different mining corporations. Julia looked over the numbers one last time before calling Mission Control. These coordinates are farther than our usual haul. Somebody making a new refinery. The controller answered without missing a beat. Expansion project. Budget people finally approved it. Julia shrugged. About time. Thousands of miles away beneath Colorado Springs, Admiral Nathan Brooks watched the launch through a secure satellite feed. The engines of the heavy tug burned slowly, almost lazily, pushing against millions of tons of stone that seemed unwilling to move. Colonel Ryan Mitchell folded his arms. It looks impossible. Dr. Mason Carter smiled without taking his eyes off the display. Everything involving space looks impossible until you remember it has all day. Mitchell shook his head. We are betting Earth's survival on a mining schedule. No, Mason corrected softly. We are betting it on patience. Commander Olivia Hayes walked in carrying fresh intelligence reports. The alien fleet has crossed another defensive marker. They are slowing down. Brooks looked up. Why? They believe our retreat is accelerating. They are giving our government time to prepare surrender documents. A quiet laugh spread across the command room. Brooks did not join them. Never underestimate an enemy, he said, even when they are making mistakes. At almost the same moment, aboard the Dominion's Spear, High Warlord Koresh received a routine logistics briefing. His navigation officer displayed hundreds of civilian transponder signals moving throughout the solar system. Freight carriers, or processors, automated tugs, supply barges. Koresh barely glanced at them. Anything relevant? No, Supreme Commander. Commercial traffic remains within expected parameters. Good. Remove it from the tactical display. I am interested in warships, not construction equipment. The civilian traffic disappeared from the main screen with a single command. The bridge crew immediately focused on human fleet movements instead, exactly as Mason Carter had predicted. Hours passed. The asteroid drifted only a fraction of a degree from its original orbit. No alarms sounded anywhere in Council space because nothing appeared unusual. Every tiny adjustment matched legal mining tolerances established decades earlier. Deep inside Mission Control, one young orbital analyst stared at the projected trajectory and quietly whispered, "I still cannot believe this works." Mason heard him. Neither could Isaac Newton. The analyst laughed nervously. "Doctor, do you ever worry this plan is too simple?" Mason leaned against the console. "Simple and easy are different things." He pointed toward the asteroid. "That rock has been traveling around the sun for billions of years. We are not asking it to become something else. We are asking it to arrive a few minutes earlier than it planned." Brooks looked across the room. "Status on public opinion?" Hayes answered immediately. "Council media says humanity has accepted defeat. Markets are already pricing post-war reconstruction contracts." Brooks nodded once. "Perfect." Mitchell looked almost uncomfortable. "Sir, I never thought I would hear you celebrate bad headlines." Brooks glanced toward the quiet asteroid inching across the projection. Sometimes the safest place to hide is inside someone else's certainty. Far beyond Mars, the tug engines continued their steady burn. No dramatic flashes lit the darkness. No secret superweapon emerged from hidden hangars. Only ordinary workers following ordinary procedures, while the largest military force in known space congratulated itself on a victory that had not happened yet. By the second day, the story had written itself, at least according to every major network outside the solar system. Headlines repeated the same conclusion in different words. Earth was backing down. Human fleets were abandoning their outer defensive positions. Civilian evacuation convoys stretched from orbit to deep space, and every image reinforced the same narrative. The mighty defenders of Earth had finally accepted that courage could not overcome superior engineering. High Warlord Koresh watched the broadcast from the observation deck of the Dominion's spear with obvious satisfaction. Behind him, the blue curve of Earth slowly grew larger through the reinforced viewport. "They have chosen survival over pride," he said. "That is the first intelligent decision humanity has made during this campaign." One of his senior officers stepped forward with another status report. "Supreme Commander, long-range scans confirm additional human warships are withdrawing toward lunar orbit." Koresh nodded. "Do not pursue them. Cornered prey behaves unpredictably. Let them retreat." The officer bowed slightly before returning to his station. No one questioned the decision. Confidence had become routine aboard the alien flagship. Beneath Colorado Springs, the atmosphere could not have been more different. Every person in Earth Defense Command understood exactly how fragile their plan remained. One unexpected scan, one curious analyst, or one captain deciding to investigate an insignificant mining convoy could unravel everything. Commander Olivia Hayes studied the latest telemetry streaming across her screen. Asteroid velocity is increasing exactly as projected. Orbital correction remains inside commercial safety limits. Colonel Ryan Mitchell let out a slow breath. "I still cannot believe nobody is paying attention." Dr. Mason Carter leaned over the navigation table. "People notice what they expect to matter." He highlighted dozens of blinking civilian routes weaving through the asteroid belt. To them, these are background noise. Mining companies move rock every single day. Nothing about this looks unusual because we made sure nothing would. Admiral Nathan Brooks looked toward another display showing international news coverage. Reporters debated how long Earth could negotiate before unconditional surrender became inevitable. Financial experts predicted which alien corporations would receive reconstruction contracts. Even several neutral governments quietly advised Earth to accept occupation before unnecessary losses mounted. Brooks folded his arms. "They have already started planning our future." Mason answered calmly. "That is useful." Brooks glanced at him. "How is that useful?" Mason smiled faintly. "Because nobody plans for something they believe cannot happen." Far beyond Mars, Captain Julia Bennett guided the heavy tug with tiny engine corrections measured in fractions of a degree. Her crew spent more time discussing baseball scores and weekend plans than orbital mechanics. One engineer looked at the massive asteroid drifting beside them and laughed. Hard to believe somebody is paying billions of dollars to move a giant rock. Julia grinned. People pay for stranger things. The bridge erupted with quiet laughter before returning to routine checklists. Everything about the mission felt ordinary. That was exactly why it remained invisible. Hours later, an alien reconnaissance vessel completed another automated survey of civilian activity across the solar system. The artificial intelligence assigned a low-priority classification to every mining tug, cargo hauler, and refinery platform before compressing the data into a report nobody on the command staff bothered reading. The recommendation at the bottom simply stated, "No military significance detected." Back on Earth, Commander Hayes looked up from her console. "We just intercepted their latest intelligence summary." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Do they see anything?" Hayes shook her head. "Less than nothing. They filtered the mining traffic out before sending the report." Brooks slowly exhaled. "They are helping us hide." Mason looked once more at the steadily changing orbital projection. The asteroid had not become faster. It had not become stronger. It had simply become inevitable. Quietly, almost to himself, he said, "The universe does not care who feels confident. It only cares who arrives at the right place at the right time." The first warning did not come from a battleship. It came from an exhausted junior navigation officer who almost deleted the alert because it looked like another software glitch. Lieutenant Zyros rubbed his eyes and stared at the orbital display for several long seconds before running the scan again. The result did not change. One object inside the asteroid belt had drifted slightly beyond its projected commercial corridor. The adjustment was tiny, well within legal mining tolerances, but something about the pattern refused to leave him alone. He carried the report across the bridge of the Dominion sphere until he reached the senior navigation console. "Commander, I think you should see this." The older officer barely looked up. "Mining traffic?" "Yes, sir." "Then archive it." Zyros hesitated. "The trajectory is unusual." The commander sighed, accepted the data pad, glanced at the numbers for less than 3 seconds, then handed it back. "Industrial traffic changes every day. We are preparing for planetary occupation, Lieutenant, not supervising freight companies." Zyros nodded politely and returned to his station, but the uneasy feeling remained. On Earth, Commander Olivia Hayes watched the same scan arrive through intercepted communications. "Someone noticed," she said quietly. Colonel Ryan Mitchell looked over immediately. "How serious?" "Not very." The report was dismissed before it reached command. Dr. Mason Carter did not celebrate. He simply studied the timeline. "That buys us a little more time." Admiral Nathan Brooks folded his hands behind his back. "How much?" Mason zoomed in on the projected orbital path. The asteroid now required almost no additional correction. Gravity itself had begun taking over the work. "From this point forward," he said, "every minute becomes more expensive for them." Brooks understood exactly what that meant. If the alien fleet discovered the plan now, changing the outcome would already be becoming increasingly difficult. If they waited much longer, it would become almost impossible. Hundreds of millions of miles away, Captain Julia Bennett received her final course adjustment. The burn lasted less than 4 minutes. Her engines shut down one by one until only silence remained inside the tug. She checked the guidance computer twice before transmitting a routine completion report. "Mission accomplished. Payload released according to schedule." Mission Control answered with the same casual tone it always used. "Copy that, Julia. Nice work. Enjoy your trip home." She smiled, stretched her arms, and turned toward her crew. "Anybody want real barbecue after this?" Someone laughed from engineering. "Only if you are buying." No one aboard the tug realized they had just completed the most important delivery in human history. Hours later, High Warlord Koresh stood before another press conference. Reporters continued asking whether humanity had requested peace negotiations. Koresh smiled confidently. "There is nothing left for them to negotiate. Their military has already admitted defeat through its actions." The cameras captured every word. Across council space, millions accepted his confidence as proof that the campaign was essentially over. Deep inside Earth Defense Command, no one bothered responding to the speech. Every eye remained fixed on a single countdown displayed above the tactical table. The numbers steadily decreased. 71 hours. 70 hours. 69 hours. Colonel Mitchell finally broke the silence. I spent my entire career believing wars were won by whoever built the better weapons. Mason looked at the slow-moving orbital simulation before answering. Sometimes they are won by whoever asks the better question. Brooks nodded toward the display where the asteroid continued following its new path with quiet certainty. And they still think we are trying to shoot through their armor. Mason's expression never changed. By the time they realize we stopped aiming at the armor, the universe will already be finishing the calculation for us. 17 hours before the projected intercept, Lieutenant Zyros stopped trusting the computers and began trusting his instincts. He reopened the archived mining report that everyone else had ignored and overlaid it with historical traffic patterns reaching back 20 years. The numbers looked ordinary until he slowed the playback. Then he noticed it. Every course correction by itself fit inside standard commercial limits, but together they formed a gradual curve leading toward only one region of space. His pulse quickened. He ran the simulation 3 more times before rushing across the bridge. "Commander, I need priority review." The senior officer looked annoyed more than concerned. "Lieutenant, unless you found a hidden human battle group, this can wait." Zyros placed the projection directly onto the main tactical display without asking permission. Several officers turned toward the glowing orbital map. "It is not a battle group," Zyros said. "It is an object." The commander frowned. "A cargo shipment?" "No, sir." Zyros enlarged the trajectory again. "A mining asteroid." A few quiet laughs echoed across the bridge. One weapons officer shook his head. "You interrupted command over a rock?" Zyros refused to look away from the data. "Not because of what it is. Because of where it will be." High Warlord Koresh slowly walked toward the display. "Explain." Zyros swallowed once. "The orbital changes began 4 days ago. Individually, they appeared insignificant. Combined together." He finished the projection. The faint blue line crossed directly through the outer holding position assigned to the alien reserve fleet. Silence replaced the laughter. Koresh studied the screen for several long seconds before speaking. "Could this be accidental?" Zyros answered honestly. "Possible. Extremely unlikely." "How unlikely?" "Less than 1 chance in 12 million. Back beneath Colorado Springs, Commander Olivia Hayes watched intercepted bridge communications arrive almost in real time. They finally see it. Colonel Ryan Mitchell looked at the countdown clock. "Can they stop it?" Dr. Mason Carter did not answer immediately. Instead, he pulled up fresh orbital calculations generated only seconds earlier. Gravity had now accelerated the asteroid beyond the point where a simple correction could undo the trajectory. Any meaningful interception would require time the alien fleet no longer possessed. Mason finally looked up. "They can still try." Admiral Nathan Brooks quietly asked the only question that mattered. "Will trying be enough?" Mason slowly shook his head. "Not anymore." Aboard the Dominion's Spear, alarms began sounding across the navigation deck for the first time since the campaign began. Officers requested additional scans. Long-range sensors confirmed the object's increasing velocity. Engineering teams proposed firing deflection beams. Tactical officers suggested deploying escort ships equipped with tractor arrays. Every recommendation required one thing they no longer had: time. Koresh's confidence finally faded. "How did we miss this?" No one answered. Zyros stared at the display, almost embarrassed by the simplicity of the answer. "Because we never believed humans would fight this way." Koresh immediately issued fleet-wide orders. "All reserve ships alter formation. Begin emergency intercept procedures. Redirect every available gravity tug. I want that object stopped before it reaches our position." Across Earth Defense Command, no one celebrated the frantic transmissions filling every intercepted channel. Brooks remained as calm as he had been on the first day. Mitchell looked toward him. "Sir, they are moving everything they have." Brooks nodded once. "As they should." Mason folded his arms while watching dozens of alien ships scramble into new positions. They spent the entire war preparing to stop missiles. He paused as the asteroid continued following the same quiet path it had been traveling for days. Nobody prepared to negotiate with momentum. The emergency broadcast spread across council space long before anyone understood what they were actually seeing. Public sensor arrays captured hundreds of alien vessels abandoning their carefully organized formations and accelerating toward a single point far beyond the battle line. News anchors stumbled through conflicting explanations. Some claimed humanity had launched a hidden superweapon. Others insisted a reactor accident had forced the fleet to reposition. The truth sounded too ordinary for anyone to believe. It was only an asteroid. Inside the Galactic Council chamber, delegates interrupted one another as fresh telemetry flooded the central display. Counselor Thalen leaned forward, staring at the projected orbital path with visible disbelief. "Where is the energy signature?" A science advisor quickly reviewed the incoming scans. "There is none." "Then where is the propulsion system?" "There is none." Another delegate raised his voice. "Surely there must be a cloaking field." The advisor slowly shook his head. "Negative. The object is exactly what the sensors indicate. A naturally occurring asteroid following a modified orbital trajectory." The chamber fell strangely quiet. For centuries, every military doctrine taught throughout the Council had focused on defeating weapons. Shield strength, armor density, energy output, point defense, electronic warfare. None of those models had ever considered that someone might simply redirect something that already existed. Aboard the Dominion Spear, High Warlord Koresh watched increasingly desperate status reports arrive from every task force. Deflection beam efficiency? Insufficient. Gravity tug response? Unable to establish stable control. Escort interception? Projected success probability below operational minimum. Every answer sounded worse than the one before it. Lieutenant Zyros quietly reviewed another simulation before speaking. "Supreme Commander, even if we alter the object's course slightly, its current momentum creates multiple secondary collision paths through the reserve formation. We can reduce the risk, but we cannot eliminate it within the available time." Koresh closed his eyes for the briefest moment. It was the first time anyone on the bridge had ever seen him hesitate. Back on Earth, nobody cheered. Earth Defense Command remained almost silent except for the steady rhythm of incoming reports. Commander Olivia Hayes watched the alien fleet scatter across the tactical display. "They finally understand." Colonel Ryan Mitchell slowly exhaled. Too late. Dr. Mason Carter rested both hands on the edge of the navigation console. "Not too late to learn." Brooks looked toward him. "You sound almost disappointed." Mason smiled faintly. "Engineers spend their lives hoping people respect physics before physics teaches the lesson itself." Across countless civilian worlds, independent scientists began reviewing the publicly available orbital data. One after another, they reached exactly the same conclusion. Humanity had not invented a miracle. Humanity had simply noticed a possibility that everyone else had dismissed because it looked too ordinary to matter. Within hours, discussion forums, universities, military academies, and research institutes all focused on a single question. How many other assumptions had shaped galactic strategy without anyone ever testing them? Counselor Thalen finally broke the silence inside the chamber. "We spent thousands of years measuring the strength of armor." The science advisor answered quietly without looking away from the display. "And humanity spent those same years measuring the behavior of gravity." No one argued with him. They could not. Every sensor in the galaxy agreed on the same uncomfortable truth. No invisible weapon had appeared. No impossible technology had emerged from a hidden laboratory. The universe itself had remained exactly the same. The only thing that had changed was which civilization understood how to ask the right question before everyone else. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Council chamber was quieter than anyone could remember. The polished floor reflected rows of delegates who suddenly seemed far less certain than they had only days before. No victory banners decorated the walls. No speeches celebrated technological superiority. Instead, every discussion returned to the same uncomfortable realization. An entire military doctrine had collapsed because one civilization had refused to solve the wrong problem. Admiral Nathan Brooks entered the chamber alone, wearing the same dark uniform he had worn throughout the crisis. He carried no guards, no dramatic presentation, and no trophies. In his hand was a small glass case containing a simple fragment of ordinary gray stone collected from the asteroid after mining crews resumed their normal operations. He placed the case gently on the center table. Several delegates looked at it with visible confusion. Counselor Thalen finally broke the silence. "That is the object that changed everything." Brooks shook his head. "No." He rested one hand beside the glass case. That is just a rock. The room remained silent. Brooks continued in the same calm voice he had used from the beginning. You believe this conflict was about stronger armor. We never believed that. We believed every problem deserves the right question before it deserves an expensive answer. High Warlord Koresh, no longer speaking with the confidence that had once filled every broadcast, slowly stood from his seat. We underestimated your weapons. Brooks looked at him for a long moment before answering. No, you underestimated our curiosity. Even Koresh could not argue. Dr. Mason Carter sat quietly near the back of the chamber, invited as an advisor rather than a hero. Reporters surrounded him after the session finally ended. One young journalist asked the question everyone wanted answered. Doctor, did you invent the strategy that saved Earth? Mason smiled and shook his head. No, the universe invented it billions of years ago. We only paid attention. The reporter looked puzzled. So what made the difference? Mason glanced through the chamber windows toward the distant stars. People think intelligence is having all the answers. Most of the time, it is simply refusing to stop asking better questions. The interview spread across every major network within hours. Teachers replayed it in classrooms. Engineers quoted it during design meetings. Military academies rewrote training manuals that had remained unchanged for centuries. Not because humanity had demonstrated overwhelming force, but because humanity had reminded the galaxy that confidence without curiosity eventually becomes blindness. Months later, Captain Julia Bennett returned to the same mining route she had flown dozens of times before. The asteroid belt looked exactly as it always had. Silent, patient, unimpressed by history. One of her new crew members pointed toward a familiar cluster of rocks and asked, "Is it true one of those changed the course of a war?" Julia smiled as she guided the tug along its ordinary route. No. The young pilot looked surprised. Julia nodded toward the stars ahead. People changed the course of the war. The rock was just doing what rocks have always done. Back on Earth, Brooks and Mason stood outside the command center as the sun disappeared behind the Rocky Mountains. Neither man spoke for several minutes. Finally, Brooks asked, "Do you think they learned anything?" Mason watched the last light fade across the horizon before answering. "I hope so." Brooks folded his hands behind his back. "And if they did not?" Mason smiled the same quiet smile he had worn since the beginning. "Then sooner or later life will ask them another question. Life always does." Long after the fleets returned home and the headlines disappeared, one lesson remained, passed from one generation to the next across countless worlds. The strongest people are not always the ones who hit the hardest. More often, they are the ones patient enough to understand what everyone else is too proud to notice. And sometimes the future belongs to the people who stop trying to break the obstacle in front of them and instead discover they never had to hit it at all.